Hello everybody, and welcome back to Soundwave Mania 2. We've finally gone over, I guess you could say week 1, week 2, if you consider qualifiers week 1. Um, Definitely a bit of a long weekend considering how many matches there were. There were also a few win by defaults as well, but without further ado, I think we can move on to our first rice pick. It is going to be I believe this is going to be our speed pick. Let me just double check. But yeah, this is going to be our speed pick. Ramping things up a little bit, I believe. Last round we had 181 BPM. I'm assuming that's probably like 1/8. This week we have 230 BPM. But the snappings are probably still a bit on the higher side compared to 1/4. So that's definitely going to be one thing to be careful of. This is also a bit on the shorter side, so it shouldn't be a pick that gives too much trouble potentially compared to some of these other ones, just because it is on the shorter side. But at the same time, it could also potentially be a lot harder just because it is a speed pick, and for some people speed might just be one of those skill sets that's just really hard to kind of play even in an accuracy setting. And we did have also a little build up into this next section. I would say in a way the speed section is also a little bit on the denser side, so that's one thing to also be a little bit careful of. It could definitely favor some people and for others. It really just depends on how you feel with certain skill sets. But that does conclude race 1. And we can move on to race 2, which will be your jump streak pick. It is going to be Spriggan on base rate by Blue Potion. Some people might be familiar with Blue Potion. They are, I would say, pretty prominent charter when it comes to the tournament scene. And there is good reason for that, as they do make a lot of good quality stuff, this being no exception. And this is, like I said, going to be your jump streak pick, and it's going to be 175 BPM, so definitely still on the slower side, but it is also on the denser side. And it's also not too long, clocking in at 2 minutes, 14 seconds. So it shouldn't be one of those picks that drains your stamina completely, but it is going to be really difficult to play this, not only because it's dense, because it's slow and dense, which, like last week, could be an issue that some people face, depending on, I guess, your playstyle and how comfortable you are, I guess, holding accuracy on these slower early game picks. But once again, we are in round of 32, so it is to be somewhat expected, and at the same time, it also gives room for those slower seeds to also set some good scores, and potentially for some of the mid seeds to upset one of those higher seeds, potentially, depending on how good certain teams are with low end accuracy. But considering on more of these kind of trolls all around, with these hands as well coming in between, more so just the same thing that you've come to expect. As we are talking into the end, going into another slow jump throw, which could also be another point that makes some people drop accuracy if they're not comfortable playing jump throws at slow speeds, especially if you're very used to playing them on really high speeds. But as we get into the end, see more of this intensity, more of these throws, and a little trill in the inner column to end things off. But with that, we can go into race 3. And I believe this is going to be your technical pick. So, starting off with a little burst, some grace notes as well, a little trill in the middle. Nothing too complicated, at least I would say for this early round, but it can still be pretty easy to drop some grace. You see a little bit of a jack on the right hand column. So potentially you might wonder on a pick like this, but you do see that it comes on the other hand, so it could be a very double-edged sword. And I expect these bracelets to kind of be the primary area where a lot of people get grades or just drop a lot of 300s in. I mean, it is a tech pick, so it is expected to drop a lot more 300s compared to having a good ratio on something like the last pick, where it's just straightforward jump stream and stream times. And I would say this kind of goes more into that bursty technical pick, which I guess could favor some people depending on if you're more of a kind of consistent player or if you're more kind of just a one and done player where you kind of go in and then kind of take a small break. You also get some jack patterning, so it's not all that bad in terms of trying to play something like this. But you do get a little break here, and then go back into what you've come to expect with this. It's more so just jacks with some bursts in between. But as we do get into the ending, that will conclude race 3, your technical pick. And we can go into race 4, which is going to be your mixed pick, and a very interesting one as well. It is going to be Destroy, Destroy, Destroy the Happy End. It's going to be a cut version though. And I would say this is probably one of the harder rice within this week. This isn't really your kind of straightforward mixed pick where you kind of expect everything, some jump stream, some fish, maybe some jacks, and maybe some protection. I would say this does kind of change the format of what you expect, but kind of going into this first section, you're going to see some jacks. You're also going to see these mini jacks, which are going to become very prevalent as we do go on. So I guess making up for, a lack of a jack pick for now, but we are in an early round, so it's not going to be too difficult. Then these trills going into these bursts, which is also going to be really tricky, as well as kind of these mini jacks in between some of these notes. You're going to notice that they kind of just happen, which I would say is probably going to be the main factor of people missing. And then into this next section, a very light jack section, but it will pick up a little bit in terms of density. Very angry as well, so I guess that's something to be kind of careful of. And kind of going straight back out into more of these kind of slower patterns with those bursts in between. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets banned solely just because of these mini jacks. They're very, very evil. And going into this next part, you do get a little bit of a light jump stream section if you're going on into the next part. This is probably the longest rice pick as well, I believe. And then going into this next section where you're just going to get a bunch of grace notes. Now, this is going to be the probably the area where people get a lot of grades, and potentially the reason why people ban this alongside with the mini jacks. you don't have a lot going on when it comes to that section, but it's just mostly the kind of grace notes which are going to make it really difficult to hold good accuracy on a pick like that. But that will conclude your rice pool, and moving on to your LN pool. With LN1, your coordination pick, it is going to be 0 talking. And if you are familiar with this, then you are going to know how difficult it is to act this. So starting off in this beginning, you already see how tricky this pick is. I mean, it's only the beginning as well. And this is a lot pick, so you can expect a decent LN file, but it is still insanely hard to act. And some people might be familiar with this from OMT4 or Favorite Official Tournament. And here we go into this next section, which is really going to test your ability to kind of coordinate all these LNs and just test your ability to release them all when needed. And it kind of just continues like that for the rest of it. But it's definitely going to be one of those kind of band-aids, as if Rice 4 wasn't already one of those picks. I wouldn't be surprised to see this get banned a lot. I guess excluding the SV. That's also potentially another kind of ban that might be popular, but I guess before we get too far to that, can continue with this. It's kind of just more of these really awkward releases, and you do get some race LNs every now and then. They're not too common, but they do appear every now and then, which can just be really hard, especially if you're kind of just focusing on, I guess, more of a straightforward BPM where it's just continuous, and I guess potentially the only challenge would have been the releases. But you'll still get a few awkward notes every now and then. So it's not one of those LN picks where you can kind of just go into it and I guess mindlessly play it. And we are only getting into the 75% mark as well. But you do get a little bit of a break here, and even then, you still have some tricky patterning. Nothing too crazy though compared to what we were looking at earlier, but if you aren't paying attention, it's very much possible to drop a grade or two in this section. And then going straight back into the tricky pattern. And in this section, which I would say is also probably very easy to get a miss on, just because it's very unorthodox, I would say. Having to hold LNs on the outer columns while also trying to time the notes within the middle section. But with that, that does conclude your first LN pick. And move on to LN2, your density pick. It is going to be Rave Beat. Some people might be familiar with this. It was, I believe, originally a custom for IRL. So some people might be familiar having to play on the same rate as well. I believe this was for, I want to say group stages or playoffs. It's one of those two. This is a fairly short pick, around 2 minutes, but it is a density pick, and it's definitely a lot shorter compared to LN1. And this doesn't really start to pick up momentum until just a little bit, which is where you're going to really start to see things pick up. Yeah, right here is where you're going to start to see the element density really come into play. Like I said, some people might be familiar with this. It was used in IRL, and it was also featured in Philippines Nationals. It is a kind of fairly straightforward density pick, although I would say this does require a little bit of coordination due to having to hold some of these notes, which can just be another kind of factor of difficulty, making it a little bit harder to act, but it is on OD7, so it's not that bad. I guess the kind of trickiness of acting this is made up for a bit of a lower OD. So you shouldn't drop as many grades, hopefully. But we are almost closing to the end. And it is more so kind of just somewhat coordination density pick. It is really easy to lose focus on something like this, though, if you're trying a little bit too hard, or you're just kind of going into it mindlessly. But that does conclude your element pool in element density, and we can move on to hybrid 1. It's going to be bang bang. Some people might be a little familiar with this. This was used in Combo Cup. This is meant to be your Ricey hybrid. I guess in terms of a modern setting though, you could kind of call this a bit of a Jackie hybrid. This is still fairly tricky though. For a Jack hybrid, I would say it's fairly easy to get a miss, just because of how tricky this can be at times. There's one pattern as well. I don't exactly remember where. I believe it was in the middle, which you might want to use mirror for. And more so, it kind of changes the kind of jack position and also the kind of jacks you play every now and then. So it's not kind of just your repetitive jack. I believe it's this pattern actually that you might want to consider using mirror for. So in a way, it's a little bit of a mix of kind of coordination and playing jacks. It isn't like your kind of straightforward chord jack pick, so it definitely differentiates itself from something like chord jack. You get some of these bursts as well, and kind of angry middle columns. And you get this any section which did have a little bit spike, not quite too much. But overall, this is a fairly tricky pick. And that concludes hybrid 1. Going on hybrid 2, which is going to be Gypsophilia on base rate. This is probably a pick that a lot of people are very familiar with. It has been used in a lot of tournaments. So probably most people playing this that have played in tournaments before recognize this. It is going to be a bit of a techie hybrid, meant to be kind of Ellen biased. It does start off fairly light. I would say this probably has a little bit of similarity compared to Hybrid 1, at least in its usage of jacks. I believe this uses more kind of just mini jacks overall though. So you do get a little bit of a jumpy section right here, but you're going to immediately notice those kind of grace notes, which could trip up your accuracy And yeah, there you go. You start to see the mini jacks kind of start to be used. But kind of ending up this section, you do get a little bit of break right here. And in this section, which could be kind of easy to miss on if you aren't like too good with Ellens, but hello, sorry, I am back. But we are in our reading SV, our first SV. This is a fairly simple pick. If you were fine playing last week, you should be fine playing this as well. It's nothing too crazy. Few gimmicks like this one, and I believe there's one area where the a little bit of a snap change. But other than that, it's fairly simple and shouldn't really give anyone too much trouble, even for those that aren't too good when it does come to SVs. A little bit of a read section right there. I do believe this was used in another tournament. I don't remember exactly which one, but I believe it is in the description. So some people might be familiar with it. But as we get into the ending, let us conclude SV1, your reading SV, and we can move on to SV2, which is going to be your memorization based SV. And it is going to be Fallen Square. Some people might be familiar with this. I do know it was used in Combro Cup. I can't remember exactly if this was used in another tournament besides Combro Cup, but some people might be familiar with how this is. Although, given that this probably hasn't been used in a while, might require just a little bit of playing just to kind of get used to it again. But this isn't too hard of an SV. I mean, we are in round of 32, so can't expect anything too crazy. And I would say this is also pretty friendly for those who are bad at SV. But of course, there are going to be the people who are good at SV and will easily use something like this to their advantage. I would say this is probably harder compared to SV1. But you do have more going on, so I guess it really depends on what favors you more. Nothing like too crazy. I mean, I guess that part you kind of just have to know the slow jam. So you do get a little bit of reading mixed into this. So it isn't just like pure memory, which is also to be expected. But it's just the fact that it is round of 32. But yeah, as we get to here, another kind of reading area. But with that, that does conclude your second essay. And with that, we can go on to the tiebreaker, which will be hypothesize. I believe this was a tiebreaker for Toho Cup 2 or 3. I believe 2. I think this was somewhere else as well. I just can't remember, but this is a rank. So it's not gonna be too hard. And we're just kind of simple stuff as we kind of get into a build-up. Okay, hello, sorry. As we do get into the end of this tiebreaker though, pretty Ellen oriented for those games. But like I said earlier, some people might be familiar with this, some might not be, but that does conclude the tiebreaker, and with that also concludes the showcase. So a good luck to all the teams playing. I've been your commentator, No, and I'll be signing out.